The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Welcome back to Ryedale, everybody. Now, this is my start point for this episode, and to get here I've had to walk for about half a mile because there's no way across a big parkland that's just to my right hand side here. That parkland belongs to a hall, a big hall, which we will be talking about in this episode. This is the wonderful Howsham. Howsham at the houses. Today on TVI we're in a little village called Howsham, which the long-time viewers out there will know we have mentioned before. And no, I don't just mean in yesterday's video. We were in Scrayingham the last time we heard it otherwise, when we were talking about the railway king George Hudson. Although he lies in the churchyard there, he was born here. That's just the start of what Howsham has to its name. The village may be small, but if you were to walk just from one end of it to the other, you would miss the best bits. Between the village and the River Derwent, there are at least two other things that put this one on the map. One of them is the exquisite Hsham Hall. It once belonged to Kirkham Priory and was later associated with a truckload of families which we've mentioned before, names such as Strickland, Cholmondeley, Manners and Wentworth. They all had their turn in Howsham. Howsham Hall was for a time a school until it was turned back into a private residence again in recent times, but that's not the state we find it in today. The River Derwent has the other major landmark here that's not within the main village. That would be the gorgeous Hsham Mill, which was powered by the water of the river. It dates back to 1755 and can be attributed to John Carr, the famous York architect who had a hand in so many lovely buildings across the country. On this walk we'll also have a look at Howsham's church and the array of fabulous buildings and dwellings the place has otherwise. It's no wonder that Howsham is often a go-to place for a quiet, peaceful day out in the countryside. Let's walk and see what puts it on the map. There can be no finer place to begin our walk around Howsham than at the northern end of the main village street, at the gates of its best known building. This is one of the entrances to Hsham Hall, a Jacobean stately home that occupies a land area of 28,336 square feet. It's a Grade 1 listed building and Howsham's finest asset. Built in 2 stories, mainly of limestone ashlar, the hall is U-shaped in plan and boasts a 7-bay frontage. It has quite the storied past, so let's tell it. In the early 16th century, the Howsham estate belonged to Kirkham Priory, the ruins of which we'll get to see, hopefully, in a future episode. Following the dissolution of the monasteries, Howsham was granted to Thomas Manners, the first Earl of Rutland, in around 1540. His great-grandson sold it to Thomas Bamborough. At that time, the village had a manor house and it stood where Hsham Hall is today. Replacing that, the hall was built in 1610 using stone from the priory. The man responsible for its construction was Sir William Bamborough, whose coat of arms to this day is still displayed over the main entrance along with those of his wife, Mary. All that remains of the old manor house is the cellar, which is Norman. The main part of the house is Jacobean, but it has been altered over the years. The first major change came just under a century after it was built. After passing by marriage to the Wentworth family, Sir John Wentworth added its east front in 1709. It passed again by marriage to the Cholmondeley family of Whitby Abbey in 1755, and the house was remodelled for Nathaniel Cholmondeley, possibly by John Carr or maybe Peter Atkinson. There is today a Georgian brick extension at the back of the house, and some of the windows are also Georgian in style. They were altered to accommodate their larger panes. Also in the late 18th century, the hall's parkland was laid out by Capability Brown. In the grounds are 3 giant sequoia trees arranged in a triangle. These were given to a limited number of country estates, making Howsham somewhat unique. Sequoias were otherwise unknown to European horticulture until the middle of the 19th century. The Cholmleys were succeeded by the Strickland family, and they in turn would sell the estate and its contents in 1948. In the 1950s, it was bought and converted into a boys' preparatory school. It could well have been knocked down in 1956 had it not been for the actions of John Knock. How about that for an ironic name? It had been due to be demolished by the council, but after being bought by Knock, it became an independent boys' school 2 years later. It stayed that way for almost half a century, and it was well renowned, even though it never had a lot of pupils. In 1993, the school introduced both girls and day pupils, increasing school numbers to around 60, but eventually, due to dwindling pupil numbers, in 2007 it closed. Hsham Hall was a Roman Catholic school and had a morning and evening service every weekday and mass on Sunday. In the autumn and spring terms, boys played rugby, with the school fielding a first 15 and an under-11s team, whilst the girls had ballet, aerobics or needlework classes. A different time indeed. After closure, the building was sold to a private investor who returned it to being a single private home, and it was last sold privately in 2009. In 2017, however, a company called Dine started to operate Howsham Hall as a wedding and events venue. Now it's a go-to place for weddings, parties and retreats, and I've linked its website below. So let's have a wander through Howsham now. Still at the entrance to the hall, here's a building I'm sure you can all recognise the purpose of by now. Yep, that's the hall's former stable block. This dates from when the Parkland was created. The block was built along with an adjacent kitchen garden and barns, and a new drive with a bridge over the Derwent. There were also a pair of lodges and gate piers, a ha-ha, an ornamental boathouse and an ice house too. It sounds like it was quite the project in all. In 1999, the stable block was in the ownership of a private company, and there were plans to extend it to the north for use as a conference centre. I've no idea if they came to fruition. Next up, we have the church dedicated to St John, and this is actually a lot more modern than you might think. Until the mid-19th century, ecclesiastically, Howsham was in the parish of St Peter and St Paul's at Scraingham, and it had no church of its own. Between 1859 and 1860, this one was constructed in a geometrical Gothic design by one of our favourite Channel architects, G.E. Street. He built it for Hannah Cholmley. The church is built of gritstone with sandstone bands and has a tile roof. It consists of a narthex, a northwest tower, a nave and a chancel with an apse and a north vestry. The tower has 3 stages, a plinth and string courses. The middle stage is gabled and the top stage is octagonal, with the bell opening separated by alternate grey marble and orange stone. Inside, the font and pulpit are inlaid with multicoloured marble, and there's an aumbrey and double sedilia. The windows have stained glass by Clayton and Bell. St John's was given a Grade 1 listing in 1966. Okay, so we're about halfway up the main street here, and there's an interesting landmark on the left hand side. I might have to take my sunglasses off to read this actually, because it's looking very weathered. Let's see if we can decipher what this says. Okay, so this stone is erected to commemorate the supreme sacrifice made by something. Very weathered, that can't tell what that says. And then at the bottom, I've got no chance with this. I think this is a war memorial. Supreme sacrifice, I would say, potentially, but for which war, I don't know. There's no obvious clues. It looks a little bit too old to be a First World War memorial, but it is some kind of memorial, shall we just say that. It's just so difficult to read the writing on it. That's a bit of a shame, isn't it? Anyway, it's halfway up the main street here in Howsham. So, let's complete the other half. Follow me. After a bit more research, I did find that indeed was the war memorial. The sandstone monolith near the church is for one single man, John Midgley, who fell in World War I. Just up the street now, as we head southwards, we come to Howsham's Old School. As we learned yesterday, the Cholmondeley family were pretty handy at building schools. This is another one that was built by them in 1852, no less. It was closed in the 1980s and turned into a dwelling, and it's been that way ever since. There is something rather unusual about this old schoolhouse though. The front looks quite old, as you might expect, given it was built in the 1850s. However, the rear of this property is far from the same. Architect James Arkle, who owns and runs Arkle Boyce based in Leeds, put his own spin on this property a few years ago. At the back, Arkle added a contemporary extension, and it's like something you'd imagine seeing on the TV show Grand Designs. In some regards, this is perhaps the standout building in Howsham today. Now we have a short walk to do, which will take in the rest of Howsham village, which comes to an end when you get to the end of this lane. That's not the end of this episode though, far from it. Upon reaching the end of the lane, we'll turn right and head for a bridge that crosses the River Derwent. On the river is the beautiful Hsham Mill, which is well worth a look. You'll notice perhaps as we amble down this road that all of the houses in Howsham are on one side of the road. That's because in 1770 the Cholmondeley family removed the ones on the other side. It was Nathaniel Cholmondeley who did so. He figured that by doing that it would give him a better view from the hall. To compensate for their loss, he planted trees in their place, and that's why Howsham appears so leafy. Not all of these trees are ancient woodland. Okay, so to get through Howsham village, you've had to climb a hill there because it's one of those villages that's certainly not on a flat terrain. And the reason for that is simple, because it's on the side of a river valley. And now we're heading back down the hill from the village towards that river valley. The river in question is the River Derwent. As you can see, it's very much downhill. And it's very wooded here at the moment as well. Not really much in the way of buildings, properties, that kind of thing. But in a moment we will come to a bridge, and when we reach said bridge there's a lot to talk about just there. So here we are at the bridge which crosses the Derwent, which is formed of 4 arches. The stone used to build this came from Kirkham Priory. You can walk north from this bridge alongside the Derwent. Although the path you'll use to do so is a dead end, this is by far one of the best things you can do around here, and I'm going to show you why. The Derwent at this point is actually split into 2 pieces, which you wouldn't realise unless you walked this path. A little further upstream here is a weir, and on the village side of that there's a cut which bypasses it, allowing boats a safe passage through to a lock. Until competition from the railways, river transport was king. It's somewhat ironic then that the reason the navigation declined here was partly the fault of Howsham's own George Hudson. The Derwent now might not be allowing boats to pass through anymore, but the power of the water is being harnessed in other ways, and that brings us to Hsham Mill. Hsham Mill is a Grade 2 listed 18th century watermill, and like the stable block and possibly Hsham Hall, this can be attributed to John Carr. He was a busy boy out here. He built this in 1755 in a Gothic revival style. It was both a working grist mill to grind grains into flour and also an eye-catcher or folly within the parkland of the hall. It was a 2-in-1 job. As a mill, it was powered by a breast-shot water wheel connected by a gear wheel to millstones that ground the grain into flour. Milling of flour ceased in 1947. It then fell into decay in the 1960s, but thankfully this wonderful old building is still here. It hasn't been knocked down or just left to rot. On the contrary, in fact, in 2004 it was saved by the Renewable Heritage Trust, a local organisation that was formed by residents of the area. Their intention was to preserve and restore the mill. Fundraising, volunteer labour and grant funding totalling £450,000 enabled them to do just that. They were able to install a new water wheel and a screw turbine based on the Archimedean screw principle. That generates electricity, helping to fund the project in the long term. The first phase of the restoration was completed in 2007 and involved rebuilding the walls and the roof of the granary to the north of the main building. This allowed the installation of a kitchen and toilets, as well as housing the control equipment for the hydro generation. In 2010, its electrical generation gave it another purpose. It meant it could be connected to the national grid and the electricity could be sold. A second, larger screw was commissioned in 2018 to provide additional hydroelectric generating capacity. So, in a way, you can perhaps think of this now as a mini power station. In 2006, Hsham Mill was featured on the BBC programme Restoration Village. Although it didn't win first prize on that, it still bagged a £50,000 project planning grant by reaching the final. Restoration of the main part of the building was completed in 2013, providing facilities as an environmental study and community centre. So this little information board in front of the mill here shows you just in what condition this was in various years. It's in pristine condition now, you'll agree, but this is what it looked like in 1947. In 1965, looks a bit run down there, doesn't it? And then in 2003, it's pretty much overgrown, abandoned, looking very worse for wear. But fantastic work has gone on here to restore the mill and turn it into a power station. Fantastic. Now, on the way to the next one in Ryedale, which we'll see next weekend, we have to pass a vineyard. Here's a bit about this. Ryedale Vineyards is a family-owned business based in Westow, just outside Malton. They have two sites, one at Westow, planted in 2006, and a secondary site at Howsham, planted in 2008. Together, the two sites form the most northerly commercial vineyard in Britain. They produce delicious wines that have won awards annually since they were first introduced. Their wines include red, white, rosé and sparkling, and they also produce cider and apple juice. The farmhouse at Westow's vineyard is also a small B&B. A few years ago, Ryedale Vineyards was named as one of the top 5 in the country. Quite the honour when you consider the UK has around 500 of them nationwide. And that's it for Howsham. It's a great little place that's loaded with all sorts of historical bits and bobs, and it's perfect for a little day out if you're up here. In the next one, we'll be visiting a pub that holds an annual competition that could only ever take place in Yorkshire. See you there next weekend. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.